Tokyo Olympics marks the end of a, this time around, 5-year cycle for athletes that will result in a well-earned mental and physical break when the games are done. But the same thing applies for those that work with the athletes, including communications professionals. Lucy Benjamin has worked across the globe in several sports, but most recently she's been Australian Rowing's Communications and Government Relations Manager. Now, Lucy is one of those people that is having that well-earned break because she's finishing up at Rowing Australia at the end of the Games. In this episode of Michelson Alexander Explains, we talk to Lucy at the end of that time about how the Olympics functions from a comms perspective and what it was like on the ground in Tokyo. We talk about what it would have meant for a sport like rowing if the Tokyo Games were postponed again or cancelled completely. And how do you make the most of 2 weeks airtime in the mainstream media when you're Olympic sport? That often will apply to any business that is trying to make their mark in a limited space. And now it's over to Lucy.
They'll see the red boys in a minute. They're coming up about now. There they go, 2:50 to go, 30 strokes. They can count it down. And this is where they have to really hold on and give absolutely everything.
So the lungs are hurting at the moment. This is going to be an absolute nail-biter. There's less than 200 metres to row. Australia just in front. Netherlands, less than a canvas away, are wearing down. They're eating into that margin. Now there's 100 metres to row. It's Australia just in front. Netherlands coming out after them. And then 2 boat lengths away to Ireland third. The Australians giving it everything. Just in front. Netherlands not getting there yet. Still Australia marginally in front. It's Netherlands trying ever so hard, but the Australians are holding on and win gold. Oh, what a performance.
Lucy, thanks for joining us. You're joining us live from quarantine after arriving back from Tokyo. What was your Olympic experience like, given it wasn't what you might have been expecting in, say, December 2019?
Thanks for having me. It's nice to have some people to talk to. It's not the media for once while I'm sat here in quarantine. I'd say actually the games were a total joy. The Japanese were incredibly hospitable, and the rowing events ran like they do for any other event for us. Like, I suppose the biggest difference we had for rowing is normally we're not in the village because normally the rowing venues are quite far way out from wherever the Olympic Village is, but because of the setup of Tokyo, we were able to actually be in the village this time, which I think actually had a really positive impact on our athletes and the whole group, because we really were absorbed as part of the Australian Olympic team, which gave really good ethos and basis for us as we springboarded into the games. I'd say some of the challenges, yes, you have to do a spit test every day for COVID, which was, there's only so much spit one thinks they can get each morning, but you have to do that. And then also wearing a mask every day, like all day, every day. And that was quite taxing, particularly in the heat. It's 32 to 35 degrees, and then you've got 84 to 90% humidity. And having to wear a mask through that was a challenge. But at the same time, a lot of my athletes said it as well. They said, if that's what we've got to do in order to perform on the world stage at the biggest global event of our time, then we're going to suck it up and we'll do it. And so we did. And I think the whole experience was very much that we felt very much like a whole Australian Olympic team, rather than this experience where in 2016, when I'd been in Rio, we lived separately from the entire Olympic team. So we kind of come in the second week, which this time we're not doing, but we come in the second week and meet everyone then, rather than this first week where we're in with the swimmers, we're in with the volleyball, we're in with water polo, and everyone's celebrating everyone else's successes. And that was really lovely. I think there was a lot of stuff on TV about that of everyone watching together, and it really was like that. And that was what was a real boost, I think, for me going into something that had been a lot of uncertainty. It was a real team environment and a familial environment.
Shannon and I had some conversations on the first episode of this little mini-series that we're putting together about the negative publicity around the start of the Olympics. So when you're actually on the ground in Tokyo, did you have a sense of what was actually happening outside of that kind of bubble of the Olympic Village and what the athletes were up to? Or were you kind of a little bit shut off from some of that broader context when you're actually on the ground in Tokyo, kind of living that bubble life?
I have a knowledge of it and an awareness of it because I'm in the communications department. So it's having that awareness of what's going on so I can brief my athletes and my staff who are speaking to the media about what, if there is negativity towards it. But actually, everything we saw when we were there was not negative. So what was actually quite sad for some of my athletes was seeing people on the street, like waving frantically at the buses, like cheering and had made signs, and people at the gates of our car parks going out to go to, the media centres and stuff for interviews with the gold medalists. There's, 5 or 6 kids just desperately waving through, the barriers to say hello and to see pictures of the athletes. And so I completely understand and respect the Tokyo authorities' decision on how they wanted to run the games, and that's 100% correct for protecting their communities and protecting their society. But I definitely don't think we felt unwelcome whatsoever and didn't feel that kind of negativity that has been spoken about in media circles.
And so tell us a little bit about how the communications process works for an Olympic sport. For those that have not been involved in it, you work for Rowing Australia as a full-time employee, but what happens around Olympics time? What happens, and does anything change about where you answer to and so forth? And how do you fall under the AOC's banner? I know that's a little bit of a sprawling question and there might be a sprawling answer for that, but tell us how it fits in the broader comms perspective of the Australian Olympic team.
I actually become a member of the Australian Olympic team and I currently still am at the moment. When you become part of the Olympic team, you sign a memorandum of understanding, like an agreement with them. And in that window, I effectively report to the AOC and their media team while I manage rowing, because rowing sits under them as part of a team. At the same time, I still keep my employer informed of situations, as would the AOC. So if there is an incident that takes place or there's something that needs to be briefed on, then my CEO is still briefed, but normally by the AOC CEO. And then I still will speak to him. And then our sport leader for rowing, for example, is Bernard Savage and Wayne Diplock. We have 2. And I will report to them still because we all sit under the AOC's banner in that sense. The way it works during a games, though, is different. I don't deliver content for Rowing Australia. I actually delegate that, and I can explain about what content is delivered and how we do that. But during the Olympic Games, there's a blackout period between the 13th of July until the 10th of August. And that means in that window, we can't promote athletes as we would normally. So I have to think differently about how things are going to be promoted on our channels. Because the athletes need to be in the kit that is the Olympic kit. They can't be in kit that's our competitive sportswear brand with competitive sponsors that we have. And so during that time, a lot of things change. My digital strategy has to change for Rowing Australia, and then I have to sort of park it and give it to someone else to manage. So I create the strategy, tell them what they need to do, and then I step away, and then I get a lot of WhatsApps because I've been doing this job for 8 years. So there was a lot of like, is this okay to post? Can I do this? And so the role changes, and at the games my role is purely to support the Australian Olympic team. So I'll look after rowing each day, but then I also in the afternoons would look after occasionally to help another sport out if they needed it, because we have MLOs, media liaison officers, who look after lots of other sports. So I had, one day I went to badminton and did some stuff at badminton. I've never watched badminton in my life, but I learned a lot about it very quickly and was the badminton media liaison for 24 hours. So it does change. You support in a different way. So you work as part of a team of media liaison officers. There's 20 something of us across all the sports, and we're part of a team that delivers for the AOC in that sense. So we deliver content for them, which can then be reshared by our own organisations in that window.
That media liaison officer role, what are you doing with that? Are you liaising with broadcasters, with on-the-ground journalists from Australia or from other countries? What does that busy time look like for you?
I can explain what a day looks like for me. So I get up very early. I normally am up with the athletes. So we're normally on the way down to the course between 5:30 and 6:30 in the morning, because the athletes go for a pre-row. So I'll go down in the morning with them. When I get to the venue, I'll make sure I introduce myself to the venue media manager, who will be working for the Olympic organising committee, and just let him know that I'm there. I'm the Australian media liaison. If there's any media requests from international media for our athletes, that should come through me. I'll then introduce myself to the Australian media that may be present. So for us, there was a couple of print journalists plus Channel 7 were there as the host broadcaster. And I'd meet with them. I'd explain that the athletes post-racing would potentially come through mixed zone. So they're required by the IOC to walk through a mixed zone after racing to face media questions should they be required. Not a lot of the times they are, but like most of the time they will do it because they're required to do it and they don't necessarily have to stop. It's kind of a weird thing of if they're not in the mood, they don't have to, but there's a requirement to do the walkthrough. Ours are pretty good. They all do it. And so once we've done that, I'll normally grab some quotes from them as well. I'll normally then write the post-race report, or I'll work with someone from the AOC to write that and get quotes to them, and I'll proof it for the writer for them so they've got the right rowing terminology and they've not got names wrong, etc. I'll also tweet for them while I'm there because I'm in venue, so it's easy for me to do some live content. Once we've done the racing and any media obligations within the venue, we'll go back to the village. At the village, if I've got media requests, they'll come through to me via either WhatsApp or emails. We'll occasionally do live crosses to Channel 7, which is in the village because they're the rights holder. And then there's an opportunity. We did it really with medalists rather than non-medalists, but we've done it more so now to take athletes outside of the village to do what is called a grassy knoll, is what we call it in Olympic terms. And that's for non-rights holders. So what happens is, because 7 is the rights holder, but you don't want to disenfranchise or make it harder for the likes of ABC and Channel 10 and 9 and Fox and Sky, who are also over there trying to get their news. What we'll do is we normally go just outside the village to effectively the car park, but you're still within the compound of the village for security and meeting the requirements of the Tokyo Organising Committee. And we invite the journalists to there, and we'll set up a little sort of what we call, it's called a grassy knoll. And they do a Q&A with them there. So that's what I did with my Olympic medalists on the Wednesday last week when we won gold and bronzes. We took them out there, and it meant that they had the opportunity to get content with them. And then the following day, if we've won medals, this is what we did on the following day on Thursday last week, was I went to racing in the morning with the athletes that were in B finals, then came back, and then we went to the MPC, which is the Media Press Centre for the Olympics and for the IOC, and we had to take athletes to do a major press conference, which is with the medalists plus the chef de mission, and that's more for more international media and broadcast and opportunities for questions to go to them.
So to say there's a bit going on there would probably be one of the understatements of the year. I'm sort of interested in, and obviously you mentioned there we had that enormously successful morning last Wednesday where we had a couple of rowing gold and a couple of new awesome foursomes born, and we had pool gold at the same time. So on the ground, what content are you able to generate kind of in the immediate aftermath of a medal to kind of amplify that through your own channels? Or are you at the Olympics kind of very much stepping away and going, you know what, the media is kind of going to do this for me, because who doesn't love an awesome foursome?
They kind of do it themselves. It was pretty much carnage. I had 2 other media liaison officers coming to help me that day because if I hadn't, I wouldn't have been able to get all my athletes through the mixed zone, but also get them back out again to do the medal presentations and then come back around, because with rowing it's quite cumbersome. You do the medal presentation, but then they actually have to get back in their boat and row it around to the pontoon that they can get off at, because they can't leave their boat sat at a pontoon while the other next race comes through. It's very different. I used to work in cricket. That was much simpler. Drop the bat, go. Now it's like I can't drop the boat and go. So it was that there's that process. But a lot of it does it for itself, as you said, with the fact that the Olympic spotlight that puts on the media, and there's obviously the awesome foursome were a part of Australian rowing history 25 years ago, and we've constantly been a topic of conversation around that. That's what people associate. So now the fact that we've got a male and a female crew that are Olympic gold medalists in that boat class, it generates its own media. So for the AOC, didn't need to do anything because it generates and the imagery is provided. With regards to what Rowing Australia did at that time was I'd set them up we had a photographer delivering images directly to them. And I had an individual, a girl called Jo, who's been working with me as a freelance, who delivered all our social media during that time. And so Jo basically took the lead there, and I let her run with it, and she just posted photos and Instagram stories and reels, etc. And so that got the real hype up. I think the other thing that helped us is a lot of our families had gathered together to watch the racing. And so where they had gathered together, we had let Channel 7 and the ABC and 9 and 10, and other people know that they were together. And so they then all travelled in and watched with the families. And so that added some really great content for people, and probably put some of the parents in a different spotlight. The father of one of the men's four became renowned for his catchphrase of the thunder from down under, for describing the men's four, but it created its own kind of hype and its own spotlight for us, by having the families being able to be easily accessed by the media in Australia at the same time.
We see the Olympics as the peak of media attention for a sport like rowing. There's other parts of a 4-year cycle that would create great interest, but the Olympics is the number one thing. How important to Rowing Australia then is those 2 weeks? For what does it do for what Rowing Australia does? So from a comms perspective, what do they sort of want to get out of those 2 weeks of the Olympics?
The Olympics is huge for us, and I think there's an aspect of this that I really understood or started to understand, having come from commercial sport and then going into a non-commercial sport. So I worked, as you know, Shannon, for many years for the International Cricket Council, where cricket is commercial, but I did work in the development side of the sport, which isn't commercial. But has the financial backing of the ICC to help it grow and leverage itself. This is our once in a quadrennial cycle opportunity to showcase ourselves commercially, as well in a public relations aspect and in a participation aspect, to grow participation in sport. My athletes are multiple world champions, but due to crowded commercial sporting landscape, no one really knows that, and no one really pays attention to the fact that actually in 2017, when my men's four won, it was the first time in 26 years that Australia had won a world championships in the men's four. But no one cared about that because it was also September in Australia and something was happening with AFL or something was happening with NRL. And so I constantly spend my life calling people and being like, oh, did you know? Oh, yeah, that's a good story. But yeah, no, sorry, I've got something else to write about. And then the other aspect is commercially, it's actually the Fox Sports have the rights for rowing in Australia. And so they show it, but they don't necessarily always show it live. So they'll show it later because they've got other things that they need to show on the channel. And then you combine it with just also we're based in Europe for a lot of our competition. So that also is a challenge. And that's been a benefit, particularly from Tokyo, is the time zone. Because if you're rowing in Europe, no one's up at 3 a.m. to watch it unless you're coming home from being at the pub, having been watching rugby league. So it's kind of like, it just swings and roundabouts in that sense. But it's our one chance to really, really showcase, because we have a spotlight on us for a week where rowing's always in the first week. And we have that chance to really showcase to commercial partners, to philanthropic investors, to people to take note of our sport and see what it is to invest in the athletes and in the growth of the sport. So it's this thing of trying to get those stories out. And so during that lead up to the games, it was this opportunity for me to speak to journalists, because they were actually asking, but I was also pushing and saying, well, hang on a minute, I've got, athletes who have, are from rural backgrounds, parents who are struggling through drought, or who are farmers, and kids who are the sons of AFL players, or someone who was a doctor during COVID. And it's trying to tell those stories and then using those stories to leverage us into people's mindsets so they know who my athletes are. And it's starting to happen, and it happens by osmosis of the games, but then also just really lovely quirky stuff. Like today, I got an email from Melbourne Water or something, the people who delivered, to tell me that a new boring machine that's being used to go under the Yarra River is going to be called Lucy, after Lucy Steffen, who run the women's four, because girls from a local school, this local primary school, had seen her win gold, and they wanted to name the machine. They got to choose the name. It had to be a woman, and they chose Lucy. And it's just quirky stories like that, and these lovely stories that we can put out into the community, that we're obviously hitting people's mindsets because they're watching rowing and they're enjoying it and they're seeing our athletes.
You sure they didn't just want to name it after the head of communications?
I would love that. That would be lovely. But unfortunately, I did not row an Olympic record time in a women's four. Olympic record time of crying as they crossed the line was me.
There's a lot of gold medal chat that's been mixed into the last few minutes. I guess when we win a gold medal, the talk is all of how it will inspire the next generation, and how we might now name a boring machine after one of the rowers. So is that impact something that you see over the next, couple of years? Is it something that you see now? Like, how much of a difference does a gold medal actually make to the Olympics for rowing?
I think it does. It makes a big impact. So Kim Brennan won a gold when we were in 2016 in Rio, and that propelled Kimmy even more into the spotlight than she already was. She obviously had an established name for herself, partly due to her family pedigree in general. But it impacts us in the sense of it gives the athletes opportunity that they perhaps wouldn't have had before, to go and ask to be, speaking at events and being able to conduct an opportunity to get salaries for doing things like that, which they wouldn't normally do. But it also, for us, it expands our opportunities, and being able to say, well, look, we're an Olympic gold medal winning sport. We've consistently improved over the last 10 years, consistently delivered, and then also showcasing what sport can do for you. So we talk about, with our athletes particularly, about their resilience, their teamwork, their just complete and utter dedication and work ethic. And so it talks to, and that's why a lot of kids seem to do it at school, because they enjoy that team environment. And so we continue to use those athletes to leverage that and talk about the greatness of the sport. But one thing that Rowing Australia is particularly looking to do at the moment is we're also diversifying. So we're not just talking about those guys who are winning on the water in Tokyo, but we're also talking about indoor rowing. So we're doing partnerships with people like Veteran Sport Australia, so working with Defence to look at stuff with indoor rowing and Invictus, and then looking at ways to expand with coastal rowing, which is another way our sport is diversifying. And so that's something that we have looked to do, and then use the Olympic Games as that opportunity to springboard and get people having a conversation about rowing and understanding that it's this full body workout, that it's a teamwork, that you've got to be resilient, you've got to keep going with it, but when you do, you can excel and look at what you can achieve with it.
Those background stories of athletes which people can relate to, even if they don't know rowing, they can relate to those human stories. And it's a theme of what we've been talking about in this series, and a theme of all comms, really. You search for those background stories. What sort of things do you do in the lead up to prepare? So I'm thinking, what do you do with Channel 7, and how far out do you do things to prepare for that moment when either they are competing or they are winning a medal, or so forth, or promotional stuff, or things you film with Channel 7 throughout? When does that actually start, or is that always happening?
For me, it starts as soon as the one cycle finishes and the next one begins, in that I have to do the work myself to begin with, to talk to the athletes and understand their story and build a relationship with them, to know who they are, to find those golden stories of that I know will have a media hook. But I also need to build with the athlete to know the athlete wants to tell that story or is comfortable, but also learns how to tell their story in the best possible way. And it's not always me that's working with them with that. I try to assist, but then also people like the AIS help us with opportunities to get mentors in to help them to present themselves better. And then that also is an idea of part of our wellbeing work that our wellbeing manager does, that it's how they transition out as well afterwards. So it's tell your story now, but learn how to continue to do it to present the best version of yourself when you do leave the sport. But I start the process early. We do a lot of videography. So that's one of the things that I'm probably most proud of, the legacy I leave rowing with, is that we didn't have any video content before I joined. And now we have a videography aspect that we deliver content, whether it's reels, whether it's pipe reels, or it's actually telling stories of athletes. And that was the start process, is using our video content and gathering content of our athletes rowing and all that kind of stuff, because then you can spoon feed people like Channel 7 with the content, because you're like, here's interviews I've done, or here's video content of rowing that you could use, and then you can do your own interview. And with that, they go, to be frank, everyone's lazy. They want to do the least amount of work possible. If I can hand deliver to them, well, here's a load of rowing footage, all you got to do is interview the athlete, they snap it up. And so I started that process probably, I started it after Rio, and then continued to grow and continue to keep engaged with them through the AOC and Channel 7, and then through my own contacts that I'd established. And then when it came to about a year and a half out from the games, or a year from the games, they then started to sort of wake up again to the content that I delivered to them, and said, oh, actually, we'd like to have a couple of athletes who's got good stories. And that's where they delivered in the lead up to the games. They did a fantastic piece with Simon Keenan, who's in the men's 8, whose father is Crackers Keenan from the AFL. And so we then hand delivered a whole bunch of content that we had. We gave them Simon. I prepped Simon how to tell his story. Simon also had some footage of himself as a kid with his dad. And so therefore then that created the perfect package for them because they're also the host broadcaster for AFL. So it's kind of thinking ahead and planning those ideas for them, planting the seed, sit back, see what they do. And then they wake up probably about 6 months before they're supposed to go, oh, can we do this? And you're like, sure, here you go.
You know, we're talking in a sport context, but that same thing applies outside of sport, I believe, too, in that you will get your moment in the sun or in the rain, but if you've got things ready to go and you've got content ready to go and stories ready to go, you can either make the most of your moment in the sun or have an umbrella up against the rain when that time comes.
They're pretty good though. And when they've taken it, they've been pretty great at the moment in continuing to engage with us. And when we've been in quarantine, they still are wanting to try and get the athletes on to be involved with things. I suppose the benefit is that they're a captive audience at the moment. So with quarantine currently in place, like my athletes, I asked them to get up at 6 a.m. to do something this Friday. And they were like, sure, I've got nothing else on. Give me something to do. So they're embracing it and I'm happy for them to keep doing it.
I guess throughout this cycle as well, do you find that your athletes are quite willing participants when it comes to media stuff, or do you find that they're a bit wary? I'm mindful, like, for a sport like rowing, they're probably almost like the press, I'd imagine, because they don't get a lot of it. It's like, oh, hello, attention, how good.
Swings and roundabouts. So I've taken a lot. So they didn't have a full-time communications person when I joined. So that's taken a lot of hard work for me to build a relationship with them to then feel like they trust and want to do it. They also are it's interesting because there's this whole thing people talk to me about, like, oh, their social media and are they very active on Instagram? And I've got probably, I've got 38 athletes on the Olympic team. I'd say maybe only 15 to 20 or 15 or so 20 are actively on Instagram and actually building their own profile. They just don't really have interest. They're so focused on delivering and so focused on achieving for Australia and for themselves and for their crew and their families that they don't really have time to be creating a brand for themselves and promoting themselves that way. So they sort of see me as a person that can help deliver that. They will talk to the media. I've worked it out with them as to who's comfortable and who's confident, and those that just are like, this isn't for me. Can I not, they'll do something if they really need to. They've got to do an interview because they're from a certain place or someone really wants to talk to them. But if they don't want to do it, I'm never going to force them to do it. So but pretty much all of them will do something, but that's also, I feel strongly, because I've built a relationship and a friendship with them to be able to go, this is the opportunity, this is how it benefits you, this is how it benefits the sport, this is some of the curly questions that may come your way, this is how you can manage it, that kind of stuff, that they're willing to do it and they will engage. But that's taken time and you have to take them on a journey. And that's the thing I learned from when I joined them is I couldn't go in there and be like, well, this is what we did at the ICC and this is how it's going to work here. What really had to happen was say to them, this is what I'd really like to do, this is what I want to achieve, and this is why I want to achieve it and how I think it can benefit the sport. And if they see how it can benefit the community, how it can benefit themselves, how it can benefit the wider sport, then they're much more willing to come along for the ride than just, they're not particularly selfish athletes. I've really found like they can be selfish in the sense of what they want to achieve for their own rowing personal goals and personal bests, and that's absolutely fine. But in the sense of what they want for the wider community and the acknowledgement of what rowing has given them or how much the community has supported them over the years or how much they've invested in them, they're very giving of that. And they'll go and do meetings at school and they love talking to kids at the national kids come up and ask them questions, and that they're really very giving in that sense.
That's actually a nice little segue to a bit of a different question, is you talk about the fact that being out there as Olympic athletes has the ability to put back into the sport to try and grow it. There's a lot of talk about whether these Olympics should have gone ahead. What would it have meant to a sport like rowing if the Olympics had have been cancelled completely? It
would have been extremely tough. It's not like commercial sport. It's not the same. This is our, like, we have a world championships every year and our athletes do world championships. They didn't race the world champ. They finished in 2019, didn't race at all internationally in 2020 because the games were postponed. And if it had begun again in 2021, I think there's a couple of different impacts that we need to think about, not just for a sport like rowing, but for any sport that doesn't have a commercial aspect to it. So whether it's a water polo or a volleyball or any of those sports, the impact both for organisations to try and leverage and grow the sport and grow participation and engagement, when the Olympics is that big springboard and that big stage for it to be on, would be, I think, quite a major impact. I also think the impact it would have had on both athletes and support staff and coaches alike, including myself, would have been huge. And I think that would be something that would need a huge amount of support from the likes of the AIS and the AOC and Paralympics Australia, for example, with the Paralympics that are coming up. I think people need to think there would need to have been a reflection about what it would mean to those people and how it would impact those people and their life, because their livelihood has been to focus on achieving that gold medal. That's what they've worked towards. And then for it to go and then think, I've got to wait another 4 years or 3 years or 5 years to get to it is huge in comparison to, say, a grand final. I've just got to wait another year. It's 1 year. That's 365 days. It's not 800 and something days before you even get that opportunity to showcase to the world how good you really are.
And I'm mindful we are quickly running out of time, so I might get you to finish by, you've already told us a couple of really fun stories from life inside the Olympic Village. I might get you to leave us with the best story that you have got from Tokyo and the thing that amazed you the most about these Olympic Games.
I think if I picked a rowing moment that was remarkable, that hour on the Wednesday, and I actually get emotional thinking about it, that hour on the Wednesday last week where we won the fastest we'd ever won medals in rowing. We ran in 20 minutes. We won 2. That was the fastest ever that we won 2 gold medals. And then to win the 2 bronze medals as well thereafter. I think the emotional aspect of that, and I was in tears, and there was a lot of people in tears. And I think it's because we have all been we've got a semi-centralised system. So the athletes, the girls are in Penrith, the boys are in Canberra. We've all been working together for this for the last 5 years. And to finally see it come to fruition and to see the hard work and the sacrifices that they'd made finally happen was just huge. And it was just a huge relief. It was this outpouring of relief, but of joy and gratitude that everything they'd done had really finally paid off, and they'd taken the gold medal for the girls for the first time since 92 had it been raced, and for the boys they'd taken it off GB, who'd had it for the last 5 consecutive Olympic Games, which was just huge. So I think that would be probably one of the best ones. I think quirkiest, sleeping on a cardboard bed for 10 days was pretty unique and remarkably comfortable. And also being in the Olympic Village and being at the dining hall and the amount of food. I've never eaten more gyoza in my life, but I could still eat it. Thing about that came out of Tokyo.
That's very good, and all your preparation paid off when those gold medals were won.
It did, and they delivered, and they were great, and they were fantastic in the media stuff afterwards. And I was really proud of how they handled themselves and continue to handle themselves. And that's probably been one of the highlights. Is we're all in quarantine, but they get media requests and they straight up send me a message and go, "Am I doing this? Can we go through you? I don't want to, I don't want to get it wrong." And that, if that's my legacy, that they realise that there's someone there supporting them who they can flick all those ideas through and ask the questions, then I'm happy to sail to the sunset and know that they get the importance of the medium.
It's a great legacy to have left, and it's also been great for us to have you on the show and to have a chat about your experiences in Tokyo. It certainly gets me excited for the prospect of Brisbane 2032 and the number of different Australian people that will get to work at those Olympic Games. It should be incredibly exciting. So thank you very much, Lucy. So, Shannon, on our next episode, which will be the final one of this little mini-series, we'll be joined by Steve Marsden, who's the President of Global Sales and Olympic Partnerships for Sports 5. So we are looking forward to picking his brains about some of the management and sports marketing opportunities that Olympic Games throw up.
That will be a lot of fun and a lot of interesting stuff about how this whole Olympics would have been approached in the unique circumstances. But thank you so much, Lucy. It is your swan song from Rowing Australia, and what a way to go out.
Thank you so much.